All right, Dante, thank you so much for taking the time to join me today. I'm really looking forward to the conversation. It's going to be a conversation that should be quite fascinating because I've seen your background. You have a tremendous history in this space, background, understanding, and so I'd love to get into it. But before we do that, can you just give people an understanding of what Circle is involved with right now, and then what led you to Circle?
Yeah, no, well, first of all, it's great to have a conversation with you, Joseph. And so Circle is a issuer of a digital currency known as USDC. We're doing this today in the United States around regulatory framework and similar footing to major payments companies like PayPal or Stripe or Apple Pay. But we're very much at the cutting edge of what would happen if you could digitize the dollar and inherit all the transmissibility and other properties of the internet. So we're seeing quite what I would call a Cambrian explosion in use cases and integrations of USDC as a part of this modern, always-on, trusted financial services innovation. What led me to Circle is apparently I have a mission to fulfill at a personal level. So prior to Circle, I was one of the founding executives of the Libra project, later rebranded as DM, which in many levels was what Circle is operationally, Libra was aspirationally, but the idea broadly that if you could connect every device on the planet to digital currencies and public blockchain infrastructure, you can create a much more inclusive financial future for people.
Amazing. Okay. So since you mentioned it, I'm just curious. Was it just political headwinds that kind of pushed Meta away from that concept, or are there other things you think at play?
Well, there were a lot of forces at play. I may have to write sort of a post-mortem on it one day.
You
A lot
should
of forces at
definitely.
play. I think one of the boundaries ultimately is that the movement of money is rules-based, and the people making those rules, whether it's Washington or capital cities around the world, central bankers and others, never quite got comfort with the idea that that type of consortium with that type of implied market power would also be armed with a digital currency. So I think at the highest level, that's the easiest of the summaries. But in the interim, we've also shown through the course of the COVID-19 pandemic that the adoption of technology as something central to economic continuity, political and household continuity was just absolutely a central piece of how the United States and many other countries have weathered the storms. And in that same time frame, digital currency innovations have really blossomed around the world. So, in one hand, vindicating of regulators and policymakers, but also vindicating of building these innovations the right way.
No, I think that makes a lot of sense as a bystander to this. So, when we think about stablecoins, it seems to be an area that the SEC is very interested in. So Gary Gensler, as well as a lot of other areas around the country, not only the country but in the world. Where does regulation sit right now when it comes to that for just in the United States? Let's just talk about the
Yeah.
U.S.
Well, in the United States, companies like Circle, as I had mentioned at the outset, are regulated at the state level. Many stablecoin issuers before us, and certainly some today, have ignored at their peril the pre-existence of money transmission regulations, or what the Europeans would call electronic money. So at the state level, you have state banking supervisors that regulate this innovation very broadly. And what is happening today at the federal level, in answer to how big these innovations have gotten, some of the potential risks that they could introduce systemically or otherwise, the federal regulators have effectively asked Congress to act on legislating stablecoin innovations and then normalizing their use inside the payment system. I think that's an important development because fundamentally, this is a financial markets infrastructure and a payment systems innovation, much more so than it is a capital markets innovation, or much more so than it is a markets regulators innovation. There's certainly a lot of opinions in Washington on this topic. I call it a regulatory and policy Game of Thrones. But you're seeing, I think, around payment stablecoins, quite a lot of clarity and frankly, quite a lot of consensus.
So this is the part that I guess I've been in the space for probably too long at this stage, since 2011, early days mining and playing around with things like that back then. But one of the developments that I've always been curious about is at the moment in time years ago when people started to conceptualize this idea of central bank digital currency, CBDCs, and now they're being discussed in at least 83
Mhm.
countries around the world. Where does that marry? Where does that match up when we talk about an organization like Circle, where
Mhm.
basically you've developed that for all intensive purposes, that's what you've created, at least from my vantage point. Tell me how, if, when, depending on how you look at it, the US government decides to come out with its own digital currency,
Mhm.
how does that interplay with an organization like Circle and USDC?
Yeah, well, it's on the one hand, the presumption is that the lower the economic risk of the stablecoin, or in this case, a central bank digital currency, then the closer it has to get to central bank oversight. There are a lot of ways you could achieve that. In Circle's case, USDC today is strictly a cryptographic expression of a dollar and a treasury obligation, the two safest, high quality liquid assets you could get inside the American regulated financial system and banking system. And so that has worked. We have more than $50 billion worth of USDC in circulation. Cumulatively, we have processed more than $5 trillion of on-chain transactions. And critically, and this is the piece of the conversation that is often missed, critically, we've done so on constantly upgradable financial markets infrastructure. That's code for public blockchains. And so the CBDC debate, I think, is still far off. The Fed has recently announced that FedNow will be rolled out finally in 2023, after a number of delays. And so there's some steps along the way to a potential central bank digital currency. I actually think USDC and the advent of stablecoins and the advent of blockchain finance offer really powerful prototypes and real world experimentation with what happens with trusted forms of money on the internet. Because the real breakthrough innovation is not the currency or the token, it's actually the rails, the transmission rails. Imagine stopping innovation on the internet at the worldwide wait phase and then not moving to broadband or the mobile internet. The same could happen here in blockchain finance if we decide that the central banks are going to compete with the free market. I'm afraid we would just stop the technology development at a point in time, which would be very, very harmful to economic competitiveness, national security, and frankly, all the innovation happening in this market.
Really interesting. So there is this spectrum that I'm sure you see all the time, of the people that are like, oh my goodness, we do not want to even touch or think about cryptocurrencies. It's something that only money launderers are using, to the side that's like, oh, let's let all this stuff be freely available to exchange wherever you want, anyway, anyhow, all that fun stuff. I'm a bit more of a centrist myself when I think about this stuff, but I also understand the need for privacy in this space.
That's right.
Recently, we've seen, of course, what happened with Tornado Cash, and I think you all had to get involved in this because, of course, you had to abide by rules, regulations that we have currently in the United States, especially at the state and the federal level. And I think you all had to freeze roughly $75,000 because of OFAC, right?
Yeah.
On the spectrum that we're talking about between centralization versus decentralization, where do you all sit, and how does that fit into this larger ecosystem of Web3 and crypto, that whole thing?
Yeah, well, it's on the one hand, first of all, everything you just said is one of the perils of being a crypto policy person. There's a lot of job security being a crypto policy person, but in many cases, one big percentage of your job is doing a lot of myth busting and a lot of fundamental education. And when you think about crypto policy, imagine when you describe AI to the extremes, the end game is the Terminator. We don't think about the middle. When you describe crypto, whether you're a crypto utopian or a crypto anarchist, the extremes can be potentially scary to folks, particularly when access to the formal economy presupposes that you've cleared a process of know your customer KYC obligations. And when you contemplate, irrespective of the technology stack, that one of the gating issues of being a regulated entity is obligations around financial crime compliance, obligations around financial integrity, and candidly, when it comes to national security issues, obligations around sanctions conformity. OFAC does not have a customer service hotline. Some stablecoin issuers have effectively said, we will act if called upon to do so, but their mere mention of a wallet address that's on the SDN list is what compels you to act from a legal obligation vantage point. So yes, we did act, and we do think there are really critical policy boundaries that have to be outlined here around the presumption of privacy in your financial life, a feature of blockchain, not a bug, and candidly, the ability at the same time to drive exponential improvements in financial crime compliance. Blockchain finance and even Tornado Cash demonstrates this. Is just materially better for the discovery of bad actors and for giving bad actors no place to hide. My argument, and Circle is leaning in very heavily with industry and other stakeholders, is when good tech becomes co-opted by bad actors, the obligation on the crypto economy and the crypto industry is to eject the bad actors and not have the good tech become co-opted. So I think there's an understanding of this inside inside Washington for sure, and inside the financial integrity bodies. But we have a long way to go to make sure that that nuance is understood post Tornado Cash.
So one thing that comes up that I'm kind of curious about to get your perspective on, and we'll probably move along in just a second from Tornado Cash, but I think that there were various agencies or government agencies that decided to go after the coder for the open source components of this. Does that make sense from your vantage point about, you know what I'm saying? So it would be like going at, because it's definitely there are bad actors that are using that. And if it was North Korea or whomever, that has got to be addressed, no question. But the other idea is, and a lot of people are just not that familiar with this, clearly many cryptocurrencies are in such a fashion that it's easily readable, and you can see what's happening. So if I were to go down to Starbucks down the street on K Street in DC, I'm actually and use something, the barista could actually see my address if I wanted to go down that road, and they could look at every part of my my bag, so to speak, right? So all the cryptocurrency that I potentially have in that account. And so that's almost too open. So I think that's why some people are like, there's got to be something in between that allows for people to have some level of privacy. But at the same time, if we start to go after open source because there are some bad actors, how do we deal with that sort of thing, do you think?
Well, I mean, look, on the arrest itself, I think this is a story still being played out, and what will be disclosed ultimately when there's accountability and disclosure of this case, maybe more nuanced and complicated than crypto Twitter might allow for today. And so I think we should wait and have some degree of trust in process. And wherever the outcome falls, I do think there is an audience and there's an opportunity to engage with policymakers, regulators, stakeholders, OFAC, and others around what are the boundaries of democratic value systems being enshrined in open source technology. So we're deeply, deeply plugged into that discussion. And frankly, one of the reasons we've enabled as a company USDC across so many public blockchains is this commitment to the Cambrian explosion of open blockchain-based digital financial services. Programmable, composable internet money needs an actor accountable to protecting the economic backing of USDC. I mean, we learned the hard way with Terra that promissory statements on Twitter do not a good stablecoin make. And so, so the trade-off ultimately in the boundaries of censorship resistance, centralization, and economic stability, eventually there has to be an actor like Circle that builds and promotes the utility value of open infrastructure. The internet of value is these public blockchains moving from the dial-up phase to the broadband phase. But at the same time, then have the wallet environment, the protocol environment, and the open source developers be able to build and code freely. I think that's as democratic a value proposition as it gets. So the facts and circumstances need to be aired on Tornado Cash and the arrest. But I must also say, when it comes to national security, the good tech versus bad tech arguments often fall down with blunt force answers. My argument on the national security side of the equation is even in an instance where, for example, ransomware, the Colonial Gas Pipeline ransomware attack, even in an instance where the digital asset that is the pay for the ransom attack is completely decentralized, we're better off as a society having companies like Chainalysis, Elliptic, TRM Labs, and others building the digital fire brigade here in the United States and being responsive to these events wherever they may occur. And so that's a feature, not a bug of this industry. And the ability to, again, move the needle on financial crime compliance is one of the greater contributions crypto has had in finance.
Very helpful. No, thank you. I appreciate that. So for some reason, I thought it's an ERC20 token, correct, on Ethereum? Or are you now
USDC? No, USDC is available across today 9 public blockchains. If you count bridged USDC, then it's available at more than 20 chains, and we're constantly officializing USDC on multiple blockchains. And among the other things that we look at is the vibrancy of the developer community on specific blockchains. And I think that Joseph, is one of the more important pieces of the conversation. Constantly upgradable financial markets infrastructure. The blockchains aren't standing still. And frankly, we think a digital currency like USDC is part of that utility value that lives across all of them and is interoperable between them as well.
Okay, no, that's great to know. I was not aware of that for some reason. I thought that you were exclusive to Ethereum. So I was going to ask, and I still will. Does the merge the merge have any anything to do? Will that help you all in any way? Layer 2, is that a big deal as well?
Well, look, USDC is the largest stablecoin on Ethereum, and in some respects, you could argue there's this really powerful connectivity between having a utility like USDC on Ethereum and what Ethereum introduced as an early blockchain, where the Bitcoin blockchain stopped. The idea of programmability, the idea of composability, and so on. And so the upgrade and the move from proof of work to proof of stake, we think, is a very, very powerful example of what I said at the outset, that this is constantly upgradable financial markets infrastructure. We're following the fortunes of Ethereum, and we're enabling USDC strictly on the proof of stake chain, and no other forks and no other spinoffs of this. And it's partly an acknowledgement that the computational intensity, the carbon footprint, and so on, that kind of upgrade is one of the requirements for mass adoption of crypto and payments and financial markets activity. So we think it's a really important step forward.
Okay, no, amazing. All right, it's very helpful to hear that. You probably know, because the ecosystem is very incestuous in a good way in terms of how many people know each other. But Caitlin Long, who I've had the pleasure of I had on a panel at Harvard not long ago, she's been working on something with Dante Bank and Trust in Wyoming, and they've been very progressive in that space. Do you see Circle going down that road towards a bank charter or master account with the Fed?
Yeah. Well, look, I have an enormous amount of respect for Caitlin and what she's done with the now rebranded Custodia Bank. As an operating model that is distinct to her value proposition, what Custodia Bank is bringing to the equation, and the unique regulatory framework Wyoming has stood up with this special depository institution model. So Custodia is a business to watch, and Caitlin, by a long margin, is a leader to watch. Our view, frankly, is that this is much more of a money movement innovation than it is a banking innovation. And we've certainly demonstrated with the prudential management and the bank-like management of USDC reserves, is that a money transmission company like Circle can manage, if not at an equal standard, a better standard than banks, the prudential risk to USDC. Remember, the current volume of USDC in circulation today is the net amount. And that since first issuance, we have redeemed over $100 billion of USDC reserves on demand. That's a very, very powerful operating model for a 4-year-old innovation. And we just don't think this is strictly a banking innovation. We actually think of this as financial infrastructure. Dollar digital currency innovations like USDC are available in 191 countries around the world across these open wallets, open digital wallets. And so to us, it's a fundamentally different, distinct innovation than strictly banking. But in this business, it's an all ships rising proposition. So I want Caitlin to be wildly successful in her bank as well.
No, all right, fair enough. Maybe one or two more questions. Sort of came to mind was KYC. Now, the rails at this point in time, if you're at Coinbase or Kraken or Binance or any one of these exchanges, larger exchanges, or even Circle, there's a KYC component to it. Makes sense, yes. Do you think at some point in time, for the self-custody wallets people have, be it a MetaMask or Rainbow or any one of the other hundreds of them that are out there, that we'll get to the point where if I have USDC, that I'll need to have some sort of KYC involved with that at a certain level of dollars in or exchange being sent in one direction or another?
Well, first of all, yes, I do think one of the most important nuts to crack in the broader crypto economy and this concept of open finance is, how do you have identification follow you, what I call the crypto blue checkmark moment, without PII being held in vulnerable Equifax-like honeypot databases. So I think that trade-off is one of the next big challenges. So in order to build this crypto economy at scale and for it to touch the hundreds of millions, if not billions of users who need it, then you have to solve for this as an open source requirement as well. Circle, through the Center Consortium, has been working on a decentralized identity standard known as Verity, that would allow for this interoperable identification, authentication, and verification standard to exist at the digital wallet level, but not expose the individual identity of the wallet owner. I think that's a trade-off that touches stablecoins, crypto markets, trading, DeFi, the totality of it. Indeed, one of the reasons the Tornado Cash sanctions are so blunt is because the Treasury Department and others can't disambiguate a good actor from a bad because of anonymity and pseudonymity. And so if we want to solve for that, we need to get this blue checkmark moment owned, broadly interoperable, and break the process of proprietary KYC standards that you see in traditional financial services.
So as part of the solution then on the Ethereum blockchain, maybe ZK snarks, or just widely thinking about it as ZKPs or zero knowledge proofs, is that a solution you think that would help in this space?
I think these are privacy preservation standards, and there's certainly really extraordinary groups and teams working on it. Jill Gunter with Espresso Systems and Mike Mosier are two people you should probably have on your broadcast and conversation, because they've been thinking really smart ways around differential privacy and smart ways around privacy preservation. Decentralized identity is a very different business process, because you still have to conform with things like the travel rule. You still have to conform with beneficial ownership requirements. You still have to conform with expectations across jurisdictions. This is open finance at population and internet scale, and each country and each jurisdiction will have a different set of obligations. And at the end of the day, crypto companies, just like traditional financial services firms, are not the identity issuers. We're the verifiers. And so creating that interoperability that is also privacy preserving would have implications well beyond finance. Voting, the whole of the planet is running around with makeshift COVID vaccine passports on index cards that are fraud prone. Wouldn't it be nice if that same type of material could be evidenced in privacy preserving ways that were digitally native?
Really well said. All right. Last question. Is there anything that you want to bring up, any direction that you want to talk about that Circle's going in that we should be aware of?
Yeah, well, look, we are, as a company, really deeply committed to the openness of the ecosystem. And as a result of that, we're in September 27th through 30th in San Francisco. We're bringing crypto back to the Bay Area, and we've taken over Moscone West for Circle Converge, our ecosystem conference, where we hope to highlight the very best of what is being built on USDC, the very best of the product roadmap, and frankly, the very best of the opportunity that lies ahead of us. If we've gone through crypto's TARP moment with the liquidity challenges, the risk challenges, and we've gone through the correction post-Terra of stable and name-only coins, and we've now gone through this US sanctions obligations imposed on technology that should otherwise be neutral, there's a long way to go before we really break into the mass adoption phase. And we think Circle and the broader ecosystem and developers have to join us in that journey. So we have a big conference coming up that will hopefully highlight that we're not just staring at these challenges, we're actually building really material ways for mass adoption of these innovations.
Fantastic. Dante, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it, all of it.
Thank you, Joseph. Great to be on.